The absolutely imperceptible metallic click of a severed high-tension wire echoed violently as Syrah's hyper-vigilant mind. She instantly jolted awake in the suffocating, pitch-black darkness of her isolated border cottage. Someone was rapidly moving through the freezing, dense pine forest outside. They were absolutely not stumbling blindly through the heavy snow. The phantom intruder was flawlessly navigating the exact, microscopic blind spots of the highly classified perimeter defense system she had personally invented. The lethal, silent footsteps were advancing with terrifying, mathematical precision. She possessed exactly 60 seconds before the unknown assassin reached her heavy oak door. Imagine being the absolute deadliest, most brilliant tactile tracker in the entire kingdom, only to terrifyingly realize the phantom hunting you in the freezing dark learn every single thing he knows directly from you. If you absolutely love fiercely protective mothers who stubbornly refuse to become the helpless prey, take a deep breath and hit that subscribe button right now to join a pack that never surrenders. The heavy, deliberate footsteps rapidly closed the remaining distance, the imaginary timer in Sarah's disciplined mind dropping completely to 30 seconds. She did not panic, and she absolutely did not scream. She slid completely silently from the freezing, lumpy mattress, her pale fingers wrapping tightly around the heavy, serrated silver dagger resting on the rotting wooden nightstand. She had spent 4 bloody, exhausting years training the Alpha King's elite bloodhound units. She was the undisputed, brilliant architect of their violence. Whoever was current standing on her ruined porch was about to discover exactly why the master tracker was the most feared woman in the entire royal empire. The agonizing, silent hunt was permanently over. The freezing, sub-zero wind violently rattled the splintered wooden shutters of the dilapidated border cottage, aggressively forcing a suffocating, biting chill directly through the rotting floorboards. Sarah stood completely motionless in the pitch-black shadows of the narrow hallway. Her pale, trembling fingers completely fused to the heavy, leather-wrapped handle of her serrated silver dagger. Every single, shallow breath she took materialized into a thick, white cloud of heavy frost in the freezing air. For 3 brutal, agonizing years, she had willingly sent her to this miserable, rotting wasteland at the absolute edge of the known world. She had violently traded the luxurious, heat-velved quarters of the royal palace for a suffocating life of absolute, bone-crushing poverty. She was the Alpha King's head tracker. She was the brilliant, undisputed tactic architect who had personally designed the kingdom's entire elite surveillance infrastructure. She knew exactly how the royal bloodhound units hunted, because she was the exact woman who had rigorously trained them. She knew every single patrol route, every hidden camera, and every microscopic perimeter vulnerability. And she had deliberately, meticulously used that exact, unparalleled tactile knowledge to completely, permanently vanish off the face of the earth. The heavy, melancholic weight of her desperate exile pressed violently against her bruised ribs. Sarah closed her striking, exhausted eyes, instantly pulled back to the suffocating terror of her escape. 3 years ago, she had intercepted a highly classified, encrypted missive detailing a massive, orchestrated assassinate plot against Alpha King Valen, completely engineered by his own trusted inner circle. But she had absolutely no time to warn him. On that exact, terrifying night, the royal physician had quietly confirmed the terrifying truth, causing her severe morning sickness. She was pregnant with the undisputed royal heir. If she stayed, Lord Silas and his elite Nightshade assassins would have violently slaughtered her in her sleep to completely eradicate the king's vulnerable bloodline. So, she ran. She ran directly into the freezing, unforgiving dark, completely erasing her legendary identity to protect the tiny, fragile height fluttering desperately inside her womb. Since that night, every single day had been a brutal, exhausting war for fundamental, basic survival. She had violently scrubbed the blood-stained floors of isolated mercenary taverns, intentionally hiding her beautiful face behind heavy, ragged wool scarves just to earn a few pathetic copper coins. She had willingly starved for entire days, surviving solely on melted snow and bitter pine needles, absolute determined to ensure her rapidly growing body had a single, warm bowl of thin potato broth. Her pale, delicate hands, once revered for drawing brilliant tactical maps, were now permanently scarred, callous, and constantly bleeding from desperately chopping frozen firewood in the brutal winter storms. Have you ever completely sacrificed your own identity, your safety, and your entire future just to silently protect someone who means absolutely everything to you? If you know the exhausting, heavy burden of silently carrying a massive, invisible sacrifice while the entire world believes you simply disappeared, drop a white rose in the comments below. We absolutely see your quiet, unyielding strength, and your beautiful, silent sacrifice will never be forgotten. Sarah reached her freezing left hand deep in the pocket of her ragged wool coat. Her calloused fingers brushed against the cold, heavy metal of a royal brass compass. It was her only physical connection to the life she had permanently left behind. She had spent hours violently filing the heavy brass casing completely smooth, aggressively erasing the raised, proud emblem of the Alpha King's royal crest so no one would ever recognize its origin. But despite her violent efforts to destroy the past, the ancient, magical true north needle inside the shattered glass absolute refused to point toward the magnetic north. It always, inevitably, spun wild until it pointed directly towards the distant capital. It pointed entirely toward him. A sudden, terrifyingly silent movement in the back room instant shattered her melancholic memories. Sarah violently snapped her attention towards the dark doorway of the small, freezing bedroom. Standing perfect still in the dark shadows was her 3-year-old son. He did not cry. He did not whimper in terror like a normal, fragile human child. He possessed the exact, terrifyingly dominant tracking instincts of his legendary father. The tiny boy was already fully awake, completely aware of the lethal, unseen phantom standing on their ruined porch, and he was already silently, instinctively moving towards the danger. He was a massive, heavily muscled child for his young age, possessing a chilling, calculating stillness that belonged entirely on a battlefield, not in a freezing, rotting cabin. He stared up at his fiercely protective mother, his tiny hands clenching into tight fists. He was completely ready to fight. Sarah swallowed the heavy, agonizing lump of pure terror forming in her throat. Her brilliant, tactical mind completely shifted from sorrow directly into absolute, catastrophic violence. The phantom on her porch had flawlessly bypassed her invisible perimeter, executing the exact, highly classified infiltration route she had invented. Whoever was standing on the other side of the heavy oak door was not a random, bumbling mercenary. They were an absolute, apex predator. Sarah was entirely prepared to paint the rotting floorboards completely red to ensure her son lived to see the dawn. The heavy iron latch of the oak door did not violently shatter. It slowly, almost silently clicked open with the terrifying, agonizing precision of a master infiltrator. Sarah violently tightened her grip on the heavy serrated silver dagger, perfectly coiling her exhausted muscles to launch a lethal, catastrophic strike directly at the intruder's exposed throat. The heavy oak door swung inward, violently letting the freezing, sub-zero blizzard roar directly in the narrow hallway. Sarah completely froze. Standing in the shattered doorway was absolute not an elite squad of Royal Nightshade assassins. It was not a highly trained bloodhound unit attempting to execute a classified kill order. It was a single, towering, heavily armored silhouette. It was Alpha King Valen. He was a terrifying, apocalyptic vision of absolute, unadulterated carnage. His heavy, legendary black armor was violently shredded, completely saturated with freezing rain and dark, unmonetizable battle damage. He was breathing heavily, his broad, heavily muscled chest heaving with severe, monumental exhaustion. In his massive, heavy gauntleted hand, he tightly gripped 3 broken, black-fletched arrows. They were the exact, highly classified signature weapons utilized exclusively by his own trusted inner council. He had not brought his royal army. He had completely abandoned them. He had utilized the exact, microscopic perimeter vulnerabilities Sarah had taught him years ago as a strict tactical exercise. He had personally slaughtered every corrupt traitor he encountered on his escape route, moving alone through the freezing dark with the specific, desiccated expression of a powerful man who had systematically eliminated every other person he trusted in and had finally arrived at the exact one who had left him. Valen stumbled a heavy, unbalanced step forward into the rotting cabin. He opened his massive, exhausted mouth to speak, desperately preparing to demand why his brilliant head tracker had vanished when he needed her the most. But as the heavy, wooden door slammed shut behind him, cutting off the violently howling wind, the stagnant air of the small cottage violently assaulted his dominant, hypersensitive alpha senses. For 3 brutal, agonizing years, Sarah had meticulously suppressed her biological signature, masking her scent with bitter ash and toxic mud. But tonight, completely consumed by the catastrophic adrenaline of a perceived lethal threat, her heavy chemical barriers rapidly deteriorated. Her true, unadulterated biological scent finally bled freely in the freezing room. It did not smell like treason, fear, or cheap metallic copper. It smelled exactly like crushed winter pine, sharp midnight snow, and ancient, unyielding defiance. The ancient, primordial mate bond lying completely dormant inside the Alpha King's broad chest snapped violently to life. The biological impact hit Valen with the catastrophic, concussive force of a direct lightning strike, The sheer, overwhelming electrical shock of the connection was so incredibly agonizing, it physically knocked the breath completely out of his expansive lungs. The electrical current surged directly through his veins, violently rewrite his entire biological chemistry in a fraction of a single second. The cold, unyielding fortress of his mind, meticulously built to survive decades of brutal warfare and political betrayal, instantly crumbled into absolute dust. The 3 broken, poisoned arrows slipped entirely from his heavy gauntleted fingers, hitting the rotting floorboards with a dull, heavy clatter. Have you ever spent years entirely convinced that you were destined to walk the freezing dark completely alone, only to have someone's mere presence instantly reignite your entire soul? If you know the terrifying, breathtaking shock of suddenly finding the absolute exact missing piece of your heart, drop a crown in the comments below. We know that the right person will completely change your entire biological reality in a single second. Valen staggered backward, his heavy combat boots sinking heavily into the splintered wood. His massive, dominant inner wolf, a legendary, brutal beast that had mercilessly slaughtered entire rogue armies, without a single ounce of hesitation, suddenly let out a frantic, deafening, primal purr of pure, agonizing reverence. The deep, rumbling vibration aggressively shook Valen's heavy ribs, physically paralyzing his massive, armored limbs. The primordial beast absolutely did not want to interrogate this rogue tracker. It wanted to rip its own beating heart directly out of its chest and lay it completely bare at her calloused, freezing feet. It recognized its undisputed sovereign. It recognized its eternal, fated Luna. Valen stared wildly at the lethal, beautiful woman standing defensively in the dark hallway. He saw the deadly, serrated dagger clutched tightly in her pale, trembling hands. He saw the desperate, violently protective fire blazing in her strike eyes. The monumental, catastrophic realization that his master tactician was his fated mate completely shattered his exhausted mind. But the devastating shocks violently assaulting his central nervous system were absolutely not over. Before Valen could even attempt to process the monumental revelation of the mate bond, a tiny, deliberate movement in the shadows directly behind Sarah violently caught his apex predator attention. Stepping completely out of the suffocating darkness of the bedroom was a massive, heavily muscled 3-year-old boy. The child possessed the exact, terrifyingly dominant tracking instincts of his legendary father. He was already analyzed the threat, his eyes methodically tracking Valen's every single exhausted movement. He did not cower, and he absolutely did not hide behind his mother's ragged coat. He stepped directly onto the freezing floorboards, raising his tiny fists in absolute, fearless defiance against the towering, blood-soaked giant bleeding onto their floor. Valen completely stopped breathing. The massive, towering sovereign of the entire continent was violently struck by a paralyzing, irrefutable biological truth. The tiny, fierce detective boy staring back at him possessed the exact, undeniable, glowing crimson eyes of the royal alpha bloodline. They were Valen's exact, legendary eyes staring back at him from the face of a toddler. The horrific, paradigm-shifting realization hit the Alpha King with the devastating, crushing weight of a collapsing mountain. Lord Silas and the corrupt royal inner counts had not just attempted to quietly assassinate him. They had systematically, maliciously hunt his fated mate into the freezing, forgotten wasteland, deliberately forcing his brilliant tactician to raise his only biological heir in absolute, bone-crushing poverty. He had been entirely absent for the most critical years of his own son's life. He had missed his child's first breath, his first steps, and every terrifying night they had spent starving in the dark. All because he was completely blind to the monstrous betrayal breeding within his own palace walls. The almighty Alpha King, a man who commanded legions of heavily armed soldiers and held the fate of millions entirely in his hands, was completely, thoroughly undone by the sight of a ragged, starving toddler. He realized that, while he was sitting on a comfortable, gilded throne, his beautiful queen was violently fighting for their survival in the frozen mud. His massive, armored hands began to violently shake. The realization ripped a gaping, bleeding hole directly in his immortal soul. The suffocating silence in the ruined cabin was suddenly the loudest, most agonizing sound Valen had ever experienced in his entire, blood-soaked existence. The heavy, suffocating silence inside the isolated border cottage was abruptly, violently shattered by the deafening, synchronized crunch of heavy tactile boots. They had arrived. The Nightshades. Lord Silas had dispatched his most elite, ruthless, and highly classified execution squad. For decades, the Nightshades were the absolute boogeymen of the royal court. They were lethal phantoms who permanently erased severe political liabilities in the freezing dark. They had flawlessly tracked the Alpha King's heavy blood trail directly through the unforgiving, frozen wasteland, completely bypassing the kingdom's outer defenses. They had come to permanently finish the treasonous coup and claim the crown. The remaining rusted iron hinges of the heavy oak door completely gave way. The thick, wooden barricade crashed violently onto the rotting floorboards. The freezing, sub-zero blizzard aggressively roared into the small, dilapidated cabin, carrying the heavy scent of impending death. 12 towering, heavily armored assassins stepped smooth through the shattered threshold. They wore the pitch-black kinetic armor of the corrupt inner council. They carried heavy, magically charged pulse rifles tightly against their shoulders. 12 glowing red laser sights immediately sliced through the dark, stagnant room. They painted a lethal, glowing target directly on Valen's broad, blood-soaked chest. They painted another glowing target directly on Sarah's ragged coat. Then, a final, glowing red laser aggressively painted the tiny, fragile chest of the 3-year-old boy. The lead executioner stepped forward into the flickering shadows. He possessed a cold, cruel, arrogant sneer that violently twisted his weathered face. He looked at the bleeding, exhausted king kneeling in the dirt. He looked at the beautiful, terrified head tracker. He looked at the massive, glowing crimson eyes of the toddler. The assassin arrogantly believed he possessed absolute, unquestionable control. He firmly believed he was hunting a broken, dying animal completely cornered in a cage. He was catastrophically wrong. A truly pathetic, miserable end for a legendary sovereign, the lead assassin mocked. His cold, venomous voice easily cut through the howling wind of the blizzard. Cornered in the freezing mud, hiding with a treasonous whore and a genetic abomination, Lord Silas sends his absolute, warmest regards. Execute the king. Burn the woman. Slaughter the bastard child. Leave absolutely no trace alive. Sarah violently coiled her exhausted muscles. She completely tightened her pale grip on the heavy, serrated silver dagger. She prepared to throw her fragile body directly in the lethal red laser sights. She was entirely ready to die 1,000 agonizing, bloody deaths just to buy her tiny son a single, fleeting second of life. But she absolute never got the chance. Valen moved. He did not speak. He did not draw a heavy weapon. He did not issue a loud royal decree. He simply exhaled. The fundamental laws of earthly physics violently surrendered. The world broke. The raging, howling blizzard outside instantly stopped. Millions of freezing snowflakes suspended completely motionless in the dead, silent air. The ambient temperature violently plummeted to absolute zero. A localized, apocalyptic gravity rapidly descended upon the rotting cottage. The stagnant air instant smelled of scorched ozone, burning sulfur, and raw, unfiltered cosmic violence. The 12 glowing red laser sights violently flickered. Then, they permanently died. The heavy, reinforced pulse rifles simultaneously imploded. The dark, military-grade steel crumpled exactly like cheap, discarded tinfoil under an invisible, crushing vice. The elite assassins screamed in absolute, breathless terror. Their lethal weapons were effortlessly reduced to useless, jagged dust directly in their heavy hands. Valen took a single, thunderous step forward. His glowing crimson eyes burned with the catastrophic, blind heat of a dying sun. The heavy kinetic armor of the nightshades began to violently crack. The terrifying, sickening sound of high-density polycarbonate loudly snapping echoed like rapid gunfire through the ruined hallway. The assassins were physically forced down. They hit the rotting floorboards. They hit the freezing mud. They could not breathe. They could not move a single, paralyzed muscle. The Alpha King's dominant aura was completely suffocating them, pressed them entirely flat against the freezing earth in absolute, unquestionable subjugation. There was absolute no blood. There was no unmonetizable, gratuitous gore. There was only flawless, terrifying psychological devastation. The lead executioner gasped desperately for a single breath of air. His arrogant, triumphant sneer violently melted from his face. The sheer atmospheric pressure physically compressed his heavy ribcage. It entirely prevented oxygen from reaching his panicked, desperate brain. He looked up at the towering, blood-soaked king. He finally realized the monumental, catastrophic magnitude of his horrific mistake. He had not cornered a dying king. He had awakened a primordial god of war fiercely protecting his true, undeniable family. "You dared to track my blood," Valen whispered. His deep, rumbling voice did not just echo in the small room. It physically vibrated directly into the marrow of the assassins, violently shaking bones. The concussive, Kinetic shockwave of his demonic's tone shattered the remaining frost-covered glass of the cottage windows entirely into dust. Valen took another slow, deliberate step. The rotting floorboards instantly disintegrated completely beneath his heavy combat boots. The air aggressively burned. The breathless silence violently screamed. The king did not need a sharp blade. The king was the ultimate weapon. "You dared to threaten my queen," Valen stated, his voice completely devoid of any recognizable human mercy. The atmospheric pressure aggressively multiplied. The remaining wooden beams of the cabin loudly groaned. They spider-webbed with thick, jagged cracks under the sheer magnitude of Valen's supernatural dominance. The freeing snow blowing through the shattered doorway was instantly incinerated. It vaporized completely into white steam before it could even touch the floorboards. "You dared to target my son." Valen reached out his massive, heavily gauntleted hand. He absolutely did not physically touch the corrupt executioner. He simply closed his heavily armored fist in the empty, freezing air. The lead assassin was violently lifted entirely off the ground. Invisible, crushing, supernatural vice wrapped entirely around his throat. He kicked his heavy boots helplessly in the freezing, empty air. His face rapidly turned a sickening, violent shade of purple. Every single second he remained conscious was an eternity of flawless, meticulously calculated psychological torture. "Are you as incredibly angry as I am right now? Have you ever witnessed an arrogant, cruel manipulator suddenly realize they just cornered a sleeping dragon? If you absolutely live to see a vicious tyrant violently put in his place, hit that like button right now to watch this traitor permanently fall." The other 11 elite assassins were completely paralyzed in the toxic sludge outside. They whimpered helplessly. Their highly trained, cold minds were entirely broken. They were completely, utterly defeated by the absolute, unchecked magnitude of a grieving father's wrath. Sarah stood perfect still behind the towery king. She lowered her heavy silver dagger. She watched the apex predator of the entire continent systematically dismantle the elite death squad without shedding a single drop of blood. The freezing, biting cold of the isolated settlement was completely gone. It was replaced entirely by the blistering, overwhelmingly protective heat of his ancient, supernatural aura. He was not acting as a diplomatic king rendering political justice. He was a devastating, apocalyptic father fiercely protecting his newly discovered pack. He was a bonded mate claiming his absolute, unquestionable revenge. The tiny, massive 3-year-old boy watched his father with absolute, breathtaking awe. The child did not flinch from the overwhelming violence. He did not cry. He instinctively recognized the unmatched, ancient strength of his true protector. Valen held the lead assassin securely suspended in the freezing air. He possessed the sheer kinetic power to literally liquefy their organs. He could have violently detonated their hearts with a single, aggressive thought. But Valen felt the heavy, glowing crimson eyes of his 3-year-old son securely locked onto his broad back. He completely refused to let his child's very first memory of his father be permanently stained by the sickening stench of actual, physical slaughter. Valen possessed absolute, unquestionable power, but he also possessed the strict, ironclad discipline required to perfectly leash his darkest demons. With a casual, effortless flick of his heavy armored wrist, Valen threw the lead executioner completely out the shattered doorway. The massive assassin crashed heavily into the frozen, snow-covered pine trees outside, instant losing consciousness. The invisible, supernatural vice violently released the remaining assassins. They slumped uselessly into the freezing snow, completely unconscious. Their political reign of terror was permanently, beautifully extinguished. The suffocating, terrifying storm of the king's wrath finally began to settle. He had completely obliterated the absolute deadliest threat in the entire kingdom in less than 60 seconds. He had left absolute nothing but pure, unadulterated devastation in his wake. The heavy, suffocating atmospheric pressure slowly evaporated from the ruined border cottage, leaving absolutely nothing but a deathly, breathless silence in its devastating wake. The frozen snowflakes suspended in the freezing air finally drifted gently to the splintered floorboards. The elite Nightshade executioners remained completely paralyzed in the dark shadows of the snowdrift outside, their treasonous reign violently, permanently extinguished by a singular display of unquestionable authority. Alpha King Valen did not even spare the unconscious assassins a second glance. His towering, heavily armored back remained turned to the broken traitors. With a slow, deliberate wave of his heavy, gauntleted hand, a thick, magical stasis field locked the mercenaries entirely in the frozen mud. They would awaken in the deepest, lightless subterranean cells of the royal mountain, entirely stripped of their noble titles and completely erased from historical existence. Lord Silas's elite death squad was permanently eradicated. The brutal, uncompromising god of war had perfectly executed his terrible wrath. But as Valen slowly turned to face the dark corner of the ruined cabin, the terrifying, apocalyptic apex predator completely vanished. He looked directly at Sarah, his brilliant master tracker and his fiercely protective fated mate, standing defensively in the rubble. She was completely exhausted, draped in a ragged wool coat, but entirely unbroken. He looked at the massive, heavily muscled 3-year-old boy staring at him with glowing crimson eyes. The sheer, devastating reality of his monumental failure crashed into his broad chest with the catastrophic force of a collapsing star. Valen reached up with violently shaking hands. He rapidly unlatched the heavy, blood-stained iron clasps of his royal breastplate. He completely stripped away his heavy kinetic gauntlets, violently tossing the lethal instruments of war directly in the freezing snow. He absolutely refused to touch his fragile, traumatized family with the cold, unforgiving steel of his violent, corrupt empire. The almighty Alpha King, the undisputed sovereign of the entire continent, took 3 slow, agonizingly careful steps forward across the ruined floorboards. And then, the legendary ruler did the absolutely unthinkable. He dropped heavily onto his bare knees directly into the freezing, splintered wood. He bowed his proud, crowned head, completely surrendering his royal dominance, his overwhelming pride, and his entire immortal soul to the brilliant woman who had sacrificed absolute everything to save his bloodline. The blistering, oppressive heat of his alpha aura rapidly cooled, seamless transforming into a warm, deeply comforting biological blanket. It smelled exactly like a crackling hearth fire, deep forest rain, and overwhelming, desperate love. Have you ever been forced to carry a heavy, invisible burden entirely by yourself for so long that you completely forgot what it actually felt like to be held safely? If you know the breathtaking, overwhelming relief of finally being allowed to safely fall apart in the arms of someone who truly sees your immense pain, leave a white dove in the comments below. We know the absolute heaviest armor we ever wear is the silent, exhausting strength we use to aggressively protect our broken hearts. Valen slowly lifted his heavy gaze. His striking crimson eyes, once a cold, impenetrable mask of strict royal authority, were now entirely flooded with heavy, unshed tears. I was completely blind, Valen whispered, his deep, rumbling voice breaking completely under the crushing weight of his agonizing guilt. I let them deliberately poison my inner circle. I let Lord Silas maliciously construct a palace of lies while you were violently fighting for survival in the freezing dark. He stood on a gilded throne while my eternal soul was starving in the snow. Sarah stared down at the crying giant. Her heavy, serrated silver dagger finally slipped from her pale, calloused fingers, hitting the floorboards with a dull, heavy thud. For 3 brutal years, she had meticulously built a fortress of solid ice around her shattered heart, mapping every escape route to keep the world away. But watching the almighty king weep in the freezing ruins of her miserable cottage, the thick, defensive walls violently collapsed. The massive, 3-year-old boy cautiously stepped entirely out from behind his mother's legs. He slowly approached the towering king, his heavy bare feet navigating the broken wood with clumsy, beautiful innocence. Valen held his breath, absolutely terrified that his son would instinctively reject the blood-soaked monster kneeling in his home. But the tiny, courageous boy reached out a small hand, pressing his warm, tiny palm directly against Valen's trembling, scarred cheek. A violent, agonizing sob tore directly from the king's throat. Valen gently wrapped his massive arms around the giant toddler, pulling his son tightly against his rapidly beating heart for the very, absolute first time. He buried his face in the boy's dark hair, breathing in the precious, undeniable scent of his own royal bloodline. I am so deeply sorry. My beautiful, perfect boy, Valen choked out, fervently kissing the top of the child's head. I completely missed your first breath. I missed your first words. I swear by the ancient gods, I will spend the rest of my immortal existence earning the absolute right to stand beside you. Valen shifted his desperate, tear-filled gaze directly up to Sarah. He reached out his wide, scarred hand, offering his open palm in absolute, unconditioned surrender. My brilliant, unmatched queen, Valen pleaded, a single tear cutting a clean path down his weathered, exhausted face. Please, forgive my monumental blindness. Come back to the light. I will violently burn their entire corrupt empire to the ground. But I cannot do it without my master tactician. Sarah did not collapse into a weeping, hysterical mess. She was the royal head tracker, and her disciplined mind was a meticulously organized weapon. She slowly knelt in the ruined rubble directly across from her fated mate, placing her scarred, pale hand firmly in his massive palm. The excruciating ice in her veins permanently melted away, entirely replaced by the undeniable, brilliant fire of the ancient mate bond. She had completely mapped every single blind spot in the kingdom, and now she was entirely ready to exploit them. The heavy, reinforced obsidian doors of the royal council chamber did not simply open, they were violently thrown wide open by the towering Alpha King. The echoing, deafening slam instant silenced every single corrupt aristocrat gathered inside the grand hall. 3 brutal years ago, Sarah had vanished in the freezing dark as a hunted, desperate fugitive. Today, she returned as the undisputed, fiercely crowned Luna of the entire continent, her presence commanding absolute, breathless reverence. She did not wear the ragged wool coat of a starving exile, nor did she wear the tactical combat gear of a mere head tracker. She wore a breathtaking, flowing gown of midnight silk, and resting perfectly in her dark hair was the legendary, ancient silver diadem of the royal queen. Her pale, beautiful face was a flawless, impenetrable mask of absolute, calculated triumph. Alpha King Valen walked proudly by her side, his massive, heavily armored frame radiating a dominant, fiercely protective aura that completely suffocated the terrified council members. But the absolute most breathtaking sight in the entire royal court was the confident, massive 3-year-old boy holding his mother's hand. He possessed the dark hair of his brilliant mother and the glowing, unmistakable, catastrophic crimson eyes of his royal father. He was the living, breathing, undeniable proof of their unbreakable eternal bond. Sarah walked directly to the head of the massive oak council table. She did not raise her voice, and she absolutely did not draw a weapon. She simply dropped a heavy, meticulous detailed tactical map onto the polished wood. Bound inside those heavy parchment pages was the absolute, catastrophic political destruction of every traitor trembling in the room. She had mapped every blind spot in their corrupt empire, and now she was entirely ready to exploit them. The most terrifying, devastating weapon in the entire kingdom is never a sharpened broadsword or a mindless, violent army. It is the cold, calculated, unyielding patience of a brilliant mother fiercely protecting her child. When you maliciously force a powerful woman in the freezing dark, you absolutely should not be surprised when she patiently learns to control the terrifying shadows and completely overthrows your corrupt empire. May you always possess the quiet, brilliant strength to meticulously build your own triumphant return. May your family be endlessly protected by fierce, unwavering love, and may your home always be a warm, impenetrable fortress against the cold, manipulative lies of the world. But the subterranean dungeons beneath the royal mountain are incredibly deep, and high treason demands a terrifying, heavy price. Lord Silas, currently locked in complete, suffocating darkness, anxiously waiting for his final, brutal judgment. What do you think should be his ultimate, agonizing punishment for daring to hunt the royal bloodline? Should the Alpha King execute him publicly? Or should the brilliant Luna handle his permanent destruction? So let me know exactly how you would serve absolute justice in the comments below. If your heart is still racing from this epic, cinematic power reversal, make sure to hit that like button and share this incredible tale with your fiercely loyal pack. subscribe to our channel and turn on those notifications. Because the glorious reign of this beautiful, dangerous family has only just begun.